Are you ready to explore something different? Something more? On Straight Ahead, hosts Arya Tepper and I
examine sources of cultural vitality, from jazz music to the Jewish tradition. If you're searching for generous and soulful approaches to contemporary challenges,
join us for Straight Ahead, the Omni-American podcast. Hello, I'm your host, Greg Thomas, co-director of the Omni-American Future Project, joined by fellow co-host and co-director, Arya Tepper. And today, we're so honored to present a conversation that I had with Wynton Marsalis during the pandemic. Of course, Wynton Marsalis is a world-renowned artist, musician, trumpet master. He is the artistic and managing director of Jazz at Lincoln Center, the musical director of the Jazz at Lincoln Center Orchestra, and the 2021 winner of the Albert Murray Award for Omni-American Excellence given by the Omni-American Future Project. And today we talk about, or you'll hear us talk about, his recording, The Democracy Suite, very important topic for our show, Democracy. He also talks about his relationship with Stanley Crouch, Ralph Ellison, and Albert Murray. And we spend some time talking about some of the vagaries and difficulties and shadows of what is called white liberalism. So, Arya, can you share some things about our own connection to Wynton? I'd love you to start that off because I got some things to share, and I think you do too.
Yeah, absolutely. Greg, you have a real connection, an intimate connection. I'm coming from a different angle, which is I have a personal story. It's a personal jazz initiation story. And jazz initiation stories are a genre. This is something that happens to people. You get hit by the lightning bolt. So that, for instance, it's a really interesting genre in American culture and history. Professor Charles Black, who helped Thurgood Marshall write the legal briefs for Brown versus the Board of Education, he writes about how when he was a 16-year-old growing up in Texas, a young 16-year-old white kid growing up in Texas, he heard about a local dance that was happening. He didn't know anything about the music, but it was a dance. He wanted to go to the dance. All the girls are going to be there. And he gets to the dance, and on stage is genius. It's Louis Armstrong. And he writes that coming into contact with genius is a solemn moment. And it was at that moment that he understood that humanity transcends everything else through Louis Armstrong. And he says from that formative, that framed his subsequent experience. And in a sense, a very real, deep sense, informed his activity when he was arguing for Brown versus the Board of Education. Martin Williams, who the author of the wonderful book, The Jazz Tradition, writes about how in Philadelphia, 1940-50, he heard Sidney Bechet live. And for him, that was when he understood the essential miracle of music. Greg, you and I were together in Beersheba. We heard the president of Ben-Gurion University, Professor Daniel Chaimovich, talk about how, as a young man growing up around Pittsburgh, in Pennsylvania, he had this transformative moment hearing Wynton Marsalis record in the studio. For me, it was as a young 16-year-old man growing up in Washington, a 16-year-old young man growing up in Washington, D.C., who I went with some of my friends to Blues Alley, and we heard Wynton Marsalis, his quartet with Robert Hurst on bass, Robert Hurst Presents, and Jeff Tane Watts and Marcus Roberts. I mean, this was a fantastic quartet. And I didn't have the tools to register what was happening to me at the time. I came from a house where I was exposed to music. We loved music. My father my beloved father, may his soul rest in peace, took me when I was 5 years old to hear The Who. When I was 6, Elton John. I mean, he exposed me to what he loved. And he had some good music playing around the house. And he loved music. But I came, we were at Blues Alley, and this quartet was playing. And it was something different in kind. I was elevated to a different level that I'd never experienced before. And one story captured this for me, which is that I have a memory today of locking eyes with the drummer, Jeff Tane Watts. I can still imagine it. Like everything else disappears and we locked eyes. It was kind of hypnotic. I was hypnotized. Now that might have been in reality for 2 or 3 seconds, but the experience was of a different order. And that's when I understood that there is this higher order. There is this thing called human excellence. It's a real thing. So that's part 1 of my jazz initiation story. After we hear the interview, I'll be happy to share part 2, which touches upon how Wynton and his music helped me, and the Omni-American literature surrounding the music, and informed about the music, and brought me in touch with a reality of nobility and soulfulness.
That's wonderful, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So in terms of my own initiation stories, I've got quite a few as far as the music. But in terms of Wynton specifically, I first dived into the music, fell heads over heels in love with the music in the late 70s while I was in high school. I had heard jazz before, but it was something about experiencing it live, hearing my high school stage band perform at a year-end concert in my sophomore year, and hearing them play all from Weather Report to Herbie Hancock's Rocket to music by Count Basie and Duke Ellington, Steely Dan, Spyro Gyra. It just moved me so much. So I was inspired to actually pick up and start learning the alto saxophone. But it also took me into a deep immersion of listening to music when I got up in the morning, when I came home from school, before I went to bed at night. And I would listen to WRVR, which was based at Riverside Church. That's what the RVR stands for. And they played both what's called straight ahead mainstream jazz, but they also played fusion, which is a combination of some jazz elements and some elements of rock, some elements of pop, and maybe world music kind of all mixed together. And I just couldn't get enough of it. And so in the late 70s, around 1979, 1980, I started hearing Wind Of on WRVR and WBGO in Newark, New Jersey. Started hearing talk about this young man, Wynton Marsalis, from the birthplace of jazz, New Orleans, who was not only a budding, excellent, trumpeter on jazz, but part of his claim to fame is that he came from a musical family, Ellis Marsalis being the patriarch, excellent jazz pianist. But he also played the European concert classical trumpet tradition at a very, very high level. And so I started hearing about him and said, who is this? And so I actually went to see him perform. I followed him when he was playing with Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers before he had his own group and his own first recording, self-titled Wynton Marsalis, eponymously titled, and Think of One and other early recordings. And so I was inspired because this is someone who was only like 2 years older than me. And he was dedicated to the tradition of jazz, acoustic tradition, playing, from blues all the way to the music of mid-60s Miles Davis, being able to play with virtuosity and deep feeling, everything from ballads and blues to 4/4 swing, all of that. And he also played incredible European classical trumpet. So I had pictures of Wynton Marsalis. I had his album covers on my wall at Hamilton College. But then, I remember seeing him on the cover of Time magazine, and he was like really helping this resurgence of recognition of jazz, which I had fallen in love with even before. So this is someone who I looked at, as I once told him, because I got a chance to meet him. I called him the IG, an inspiration to our generation. And I first met him after a concert when Jazz at Lincoln Center was just a summer program at Lincoln Center. And I met him after one of the concerts. Fellow writer Playthell Benjamin knew the head of publicity for the company that handled Wynton's work and maybe the Lincoln Center Jazz program. And so I came to this concert and went to his home on 65th Street, high rise overlooking the Hudson. And I met him, we talked. But the first thing we did before we talked is we went to play basketball about a block away. It was late at night. I had my shoes on. He's like, "Hey, man, you better watch out. You're going to bust your ass, man." I said, "I'm all right."
This sounds like a Chappelle Prince story. Can Wynton play ball?
Oh, Wynton can really play ball. He plays ball very well. He plays chess very well. So, yes. So anyway, I got a chance to play ball with him. Then we went back to his pad. There was a bunch of other people there too, but we kicked it for like 3 hours, talking about everything and sundry. And that started a personal connection. And so he's just been inspiring to me in my dedication to the music. He showed that someone of my generation could be dedicated in the same way. And that's why we're glad to present this conversation that I have with Wynton Marsalis.
Yeah, Greg, I think we can agree that, the jazz tradition is this American tradition of nobility, this tradition that transmits life going back 100 years. And Wynton Marsalis, in so many ways, is the embodiment of the best, so much of what this tradition has to offer.
And also an embodiment of the Omni-American ideal. Enjoy. All right, Wynton, thank you so much for speaking with me about the Democracy Suite. And let me first ask you, when and why did you write the Democracy Suite?
Just looking around at all the things that happened, like all of us, it's a mutual experience. We all had being at home. There was not the chance to look away from everything that happened. And later in this summer, this past summer, speaking with members of our touring team and our concert team at Jazz at Lincoln Center, we were thinking of ways to get out in space and to continue to serve our audience. And one of the members of our team, Dan Israel, said we should write a piece and go into the hall and record it and offer it to presenters. So it was just easy for me to write it, and I wrote it, and then we went into the hall and we played it, and we went on a tour in the fall. Went on a 3-week tour, a lot of great places, people we knew who we had been working with, great partners at Chautauqua, and other venues that we played. All beautiful community. Everybody was so glad to get out. Of course, socially distanced. We take a COVID test every week, and then we sent the film of what we had done in our hall out around the country and the world. And then when the shows were shown, I would get on Zoom and do an interview with different people from that community. And it ended up being a nice thing, a soulful thing to do, and to give the opportunity to connect with a lot of different people around the world.
How would you connect the most previous recording to the Democracy Suite, the Ever Funky Lowdown, to the Democracy Suite? I'd like you to thematically connect them.
Well, the Ever Funky Lowdown was, I started first thinking about that in 2015. and we recorded it in 2019. We released it in 2020, and it seemed like it was written for this time, but it wasn't. It was written before that, before this time. And it was a big thing with a lot of words and three beautiful singers, and Wendell Pierce was doing the narration. That it was like a circus, a lot of different kind of music, very complex orchestration, and the use of another language, unusual musical language, in terms of using different types of New Orleans funk beats, two beats, using counterpoint stuff in different keys. It was much more avant-garde in that way. In terms of this piece, it's much more to the point and uses kind of language, freedom language of the 1960s and 70s. And the way that we play, we always put a little Kilroy was here, kind of signature on it. We play a lot more contrapuntal improvisation, more space for improvisation. And Democracy Suite was much easier to write because it's just not as involved. It went down much less marking of parts, fewer for septet. But the type of trust it takes to play in that way is, I guess, it's just this, comes from the same type of consciousness and feeling. And the Democracy Suite was instrumental music about the time right now, topical. And the Ever Funky Lowdown is topical, but it's about all times.
I hear you. Okay. So let's talk about some of the titles in the Democracy Suite. By the way, I really dig the recording. I think Be Present was a great way to start, feeling wise, the recording. Certain things are clear, certain things are a little more mysterious. So sloganize, patronize, realize, revolutionize, activism. I think that's, that's fairly clear. Ballot box bounce, vote, but there's some others that is not quite as clear, So I want to ask you about those. Now, be present implies be present, and there's a lot of implications to that, but I'm curious what you specifically had in mind for that opening track.
Well, I had two things. One, I wanted to have the language of like writing in fourths in a melody that was recognizable. Somebody said it sounded like Stanley Turrentine's tune, Sugar.
I was wondering what that's like. I was like, dang, this reminded me of some. When
I listened, when they told me that I listened to it, it did. I mean, I didn't know that.
Right, of course.
But of course, it develops in a different way.
Sure.
But I did want to get a theme that was like something you had heard, like kind of like that kind of freedom movement music, minor key, fourth intervals, and then to put a different type of bridge, with a contrapuntal line, changes. It seem easy, but you got to kind of know where they're going. Always try to find like a harmonic progression that still has some lyricism. Having written progressions that are really complex, but nobody can really hear the complexity of it. So it's like doing a double juke, you just end up where you started. So with that, and then by be present, it means be in this time. It's for everybody who is actually present, who got out, who protested, who let their voice be heard, who in any way. I was asked a lot during this time in interviews about what did I think about Black Lives Matter? What do I think about X racial thing? And I always would say, well, we have such a bad problem with it in so many arenas. Whatever your arena you're in, do something. Be present, and you're gonna be helping. Because anyway, you look, the banking industry, man, you could take your pick. There's been a problem so long in our country. From that to urban renewal, to laws, to police, to schools, to business, it doesn't matter. So be present, be a part of it. And then for all the people who had to be present when they didn't want to be. Like there's this thought that the essential workers and the healthcare workers wanted to be at work. They have families too. They have problems, tragedies, things. They want their health. They have all the problems we have and more, and they have to go into work and deal with an illness that we don't really know what it is, and maybe get it. And even doctors, it doesn't matter. You're looking at whole healthcare system of everybody who had to be present, and people showed up. And we have a tendency to think it's like a Disney film, and they have a cape on and they're showing up and but it's not like that. They're just going to work, and they have all the same personal problems and family members dying and tragedies exacerbated by monetary issues, and still they end dealing with an overwhelmed system of sick people every day. So I loved what, you know, when people would 7 o'clock beat on their pans and
Yeah,
yeah,
right.
man, that's, I mean, even though, you know, okay, but I think we should still be doing that. Like,
Absolutely.
You know, it make you mindful.
Yeah.
So the gesture itself was mindfulness, you know?
Yeah, there we go. There we go. I mean, one of the things that comes to mind about the healthcare workers, yeah, they going to work, they got to do what they got to do. But to me, that's like an everyday kind of heroism because of what they were doing in the context that they were doing it daily, facing danger.
And it also, many don't want to do it.
Right.
So it's not like, you know.
Yeah.
And the circumstances also force many people to do it.
That's right. They didn't
but
have a
that
choice.
doesn't make it any less. It doesn't make it any less heroic.
That's right. That's right. Okay.
You know.
Mm-hmm. That dance that we do, that you love too.
Right. That's just like a groove. You know, people like to play grooves. Man, I was notice all the kind of on the television. I would be noticing the different protests. Some people have a nice groove, man. They'd be in a car. No freedom, no work. So, you know, depending on their chant, they would have a more complex rhythm.
Right.
And I see more people playing tambourines. I always wonder where do all these damn tambourines come from. And you know, being from New Orleans, just any type of parade, people getting out in the street, getting down, getting up and getting down. Just, that's all it is. And it also, a lot of the Democracy Suite has 2 melodic lines going at the same time, kind of contrapuntal writing that just has 2-part counterpoint. And the solos, a lot of times we're dialoguing with each other and I was trying to share the space more. So everything I do on the Democracy Suite, we play more 2 or 3 horns, polyphony, to try to say that we have to share our space more.
Shared leadership is what we call it for Jazz Leadership Project. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It came round again.
It come round, yeah.
Come round. All right.
It come round again, just what old people tell you. No matter where you are, if somebody has been around, every time you tell them something, it reminds them of something else. Oh, this ain't nothing but how we had it here. That's more of a just, that's related to be present. So be present is oh yeah. A lot of it has a similarity to music Art Blakey would play. And
who would play?
That Art Blakey would play.
Yeah.
But my thing with that is always there's always been a push to run jazz musicians away from their identity. And if they go away from their identity to European avant-garde, they're cutting edge. If they go away from their identity to any form of pop music, funk, hip hop, rock, whatever it is, then they're embracing the future. So I always reiterate for my younger musicians and whoever comes after, you don't have to run from your identity. This too can be modern. And you have to imbue that with the feeling and the consciousness, and don't run from your giants, because it's designed to run you off of them. When you see something designed to run you off of it, run towards it. You know, it's like how black folks in Booker T. Washington's time, they would say, how do y'all know how to vote when they vote? They say, we look at how the white folks vote and we vote the other way. You have to know, you know, and I'm not turning it even into a racial.
No, believe me, you talking about post, you know, Reconstruction, post-Reconstruction, you talking about early part of the 20th century, you know.
And now I'm talking, and that could apply to anything, any philosophy that makes you weaker. And then you put in a position of having to embrace that for you to be okay. And that's like a catch-22 that the Afro-American has been put in many times by black and white folks. But like my father always says, he went to black college, they could not play jazz in the school. So it's not like, okay, so you can play classical music, great. You can play in the band that played R&B. We're not gonna teach you that, but you can come play the dance. But jazz, we don't want to hear that. So you're stuck in that position, or you could be dealing with, a critical community that wants you to be reflect the European avant-garde. If you do that, you're okay. If you don't, you're not okay. And everybody wants to be loved. You got to choose who you want to be loved by. Love who love you. So don't get out there trying to please. Greg, I wanna go out with you and I love you, but can you just not be you? Can you make yourself be 30, or can you make yourself be 80, or can you make your head look different, or can you be at a certain point, man?
I hear you, man. Now
and then you come around again, also got a count line, something like that. That's also tricky kind of harmony. It's not tricky, but it puts you in a harmonic space that requires you to know the harmony without it being complex. It's not something that's abstracted to the point that it's, it's not mathematic in that way. Right. Even though I'm not against those kind of things, but.
Okay. All right. How about Deeper Than Dreams?
Well, that's just, a lot of people couldn't sleep in that time. They lost their loved ones.
Yeah.
And I just say you couldn't see your people who passed away, and you didn't have the same type of opportunity to close out like you would have in cases of death that were not sudden. So people who had elderly people, just generally, some younger people passed away, but generally elderly people with some underlying conditions, if you weren't in the state or you weren't near them, a lot of times you didn't see them. So they have to come to you, and they come to you in a dream, but it's deeper than a dream because everybody is having it. So it's a collective kind of thing that makes it deeper. And you have to sit with them and heal. Your grief is healed with them by sitting like that in that state. Wow. That's what I meant by that. And because it's for my father, so I use the language of Ornette Coleman. My father loved Ornette. Ornette lived in New Orleans in the 50s, and Ed Blackwell, Ornette's first drummer, grew up playing with my father. They all wasn't but 5 or 6 of them trying to play modern jazz. And Ornette told me one time that my daddy and Alvin Baptiste, great clarinetist also from New Orleans, they were all close. Anybody trying to play modern jazz, they were struggling against what was going on. And by that, I don't mean segregation, just they didn't have an audience really. That Alvin Baptiste and my father drove to Los Angeles and knocked on his door and said, "Man, we just came to see what you was doing." So it's something about it. When he told me the story, we both started laughing. He was telling the story to make me see how familiar stuff was and how much love they had between them and how serious they were about music. Like, you're gonna drive from New Orleans to Los Angeles just to see what somebody is doing?
Yeah, man, I hear you. And then That's When All Will See.
Well, that talks about how we all come together when there's a tragedy, that the tragedy overwhelms our tribalism. In the moment of that, like after Katrina, we saw that with the nation and the citizens of New Orleans. After 9/11, we saw with people traveling around and doing different things, we were forced to come together. So that's when all we'll see is more a global thing. Like, when will we all see that our existence on this earth, we have a symbiotic relationship with people, and we're in ecosystems that will be in balance, and they can accommodate everybody. That kind of ecosystem thinking and ecosystem health, instead of imbalance because of greed and stupidity. And it's the source of endless religious books, paintings, music. It just goes on and on of people and shamans and seers and priests and priestesses, artists who've said this. So it's just another statement of that in the New Orleans way. And with that, I put it in a key that you don't necessarily want to play in. It's in E. And but still, the question for me is to find that balance between things that have musical complexity, but still have a kind of lyrical simplicity, and a kind of form that someone can listen to and figure out where the form is at.
So that's you're stating like an aesthetic objective of yours in terms of your style and your compositional style.
On this record, yeah. And as I get older, I increasingly try to do that.
Okay, I hear you. The promotional copy for the digital album quotes you as saying, the question that confronts us right now as a nation is, do we want to find a better way? And so I'm asking you to extend, elaborate, and refine upon what you just said.
Well, you see, you got to understand it.
Obviously, you know that I just quoted Grandmaster Albert Murray in one of his key phrases. That's going to be the last question I ask you about. But this one, continue, like, do we want to find a better way? It seems to me, if I may get editorial for a moment, that many of us do want to find a better way, as many of us don't know how to get to that better way. There are some people who don't really want to find a better way because it's just fine the way it is for them right now. Okay. And this is at every strata of the society. It's not just elites, and it's not just, folks who are, hicks who are uneducated and therefore supported the previous president. I mean, it really covers the spectrum. But can you riff on that a little more? Because, I think it's necessary for us to strive to find a better way. And like, what indications or what ways do you think we can get to that, bro?
Once again, I think that it's we can't look at other people and know what they're doing. We can only work on ourselves and our community and what we are doing. What are me and you doing? And what can we do to be better citizens in our community? And we can find a lot that we could do. And I think it's such a large problem that confronts the world. And my question in that was a question of, is that what you want to do? You may not want to do that. So
that's what I said. Basically, some people
with my
don't
students,
really
I always say, if my dad used to always say, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him thirsty. Like, man, if you don't want it to be, and it's not for me to look at you and say, you need to be doing this. I need to say to myself, what can I do to show, what actions can I take to demonstrate more fully that I want to find a better way? And because that means I'm going to do something different from what I'm doing. And I have to challenge myself to go down that difficult road. And sometimes I'm up to it and sometimes I'm not. So, and the we is a matter of a kind of collective consciousness. Like in a jazz group, for us to play together, we have to want to play together. Ted Nash is told him, I have to play with him. If I have to play one chorus instead of 5, I have to want to do that. If I don't want to play with him, I don't need 4 horns. I'll just play by myself. I can play as long as I want.
Right.
But if I want to, I have to figure out how to share this space. If I want to follow the Constitution, I'm not trying to figure out how to get around it. I'm trying to figure out how to strengthen it because it's designed to distribute agency through a very complex system of checks and balances. And that system is easy to subvert. Like any law is, it's easy to, and the question is, do you want to follow the laws? Do you want to? When we say things like with police reform, it ends up being a senseless argument with defund the police, and you get the most extreme sides, and they, newspapers love whatever is extreme. So that leads you toward whoever has mental illness. So now we're making kind of fun of, I'm not gonna say it's fun, but we're kind of playing on a mental illness in the society, somebody who will get out, even to the most extreme, kill people, holler and scream, spit on people, knock people out, hit people. Most people are not going to do that. Right. Police who will be extremely brutal and cruel, now they represent all the police.
No.
So, and the truth is that most of us, we don't fall in that category. We're participants, and the integrity of our participation, we monitor that. And so when we hear foolishness, it's important not to entertain foolishness. Because man, you start entertaining foolishness just for the fun of it, and you look up and you're foolish. And the quality of life diminishes for all of us. So it's a challenge, but it's always been a challenge. And for you and I, for we're walking down a long road. If we aspire for a richer and more enriched way of life for more people, that by necessity is going to be people who don't agree with us, who don't look at the world the way we look at it.
That's right.
Who are not in our group. Like the world we can't look for what I want the world to be good, but not for these people. It's like the whole thing that we saw symbolically in the election. We only want the votes of these people not to count. Man, you know, okay, it's easy for us to agree with that because it's you and I, because it's our side. We see how absurd that is.
Right.
But there's a lot on our side that is absurd.
That's true. And let me just say this right quick. I mean, I make sure to have friends on the other side of the aisle. You were implying, you know,
right,
the liberal democratic side. I make it my way. I consider myself a radical moderate. I position myself that way. You know what I'm saying? In these days of extreme, that's a radical position to be a moderate. But I find that some people on the right, who are my friends, conservatives, it's interesting because the other side of what you were saying, man, is that some of them feel that what happened on January 6th had to do with people feeling that their voice wasn't being heard. And why were they even supporting this guy in the first place? It's like their voice wasn't being heard. Now, I have some disagreements with that notion. At the same time, in this democracy, we have to like listen to that and to whatever level of truth there is, as partial as it may be, we need to deal with that and look at how people can express, as you mentioned before, their agency. How can they, you know what I'm saying? So we have to get to that and be able to do it in a conversational, participatory, contrapuntal way. You know, obviously I'm alluding to the music too, you know, and to our democratic process. So my last question to you, for me, I learned about the deep connections between jazz and democracy. It's something that I kind of felt, but it was articulated with clarity in writing through the work, first me reading Stanley Crouch, and then reading Stanley led me to the work of Ralph Ellison and Albert Murray. So for me, those three, the way they explicated the profound relationship between the music and democracy was foundational for me. I'm just wondering if you could, you know, tell us about that trio in relation to your understanding of that relationship.
Yeah, you know, man, I mean, I love them personally, so it's hard to even talk about it.
Yeah.
But you know, writers are not musicians. And because my daddy liked to talk about music, I like to talk about it. I like to talk about it. I like to read about it. I love the stuff they said. Some stuff I agree with, some I didn't, but I'm a musician. So a musician plays music. And you can be a musician who's unbelievable understanding of music and can play and write. And you may not want to talk about it or not know. You may have nothing to say about it, but what you're saying about it is in your music. I read an interview with Steve Coleman and he said that. It made me laugh because it's so true. And I think that
but what I'm asking you, and let me just, you know, I'm not really pushing back because I feel with you and I hear what you're saying, but I would say that, I mean, look, Stanley played drums, Ellison played trumpet, Murray played some bass. I'm not talking about professionally.
But I'm saying,
you know, don't get me wrong. I played saxophone. Again, I'm not saying professionally. What's that?
If you hear Stanley play the drums, you see why he went into writing. I mean, I'm only messing with him because I messed with him when he was alive nonstop because he loved messing with you.
Oh, no doubt.
Because he loved messing with me, I would always mess with him and say, all right, man, you keep messing with me, I'm gonna make you play those drums.
Well, I'll tell you something, man. I remember one time I went over when he was still on 11th Street in the Village, and he put on this recording. Matter of fact, you might have talked about
of him and David Murray.
Well, no, it was just him. You
Oh,
talked
really?
about you talked about that at his memorial service, but no,
Right.
it was just him. And I'm listening. Now you, with the relationship you had with him, you were just frank and candid. I didn't know who it was, so I was like, I'm hedging my bets. I'm like, that's real interesting. And he said, that's me. I said, oh, okay.
It's really sad now.
And we went on to the next subject.
No, man, I loved him. I mean, you know, but me and him, because there's such a kind of in the quote unquote liberal writers, there's such a kind of patronization and propriety over black people, like the intellectual part of it, like the leadership. They don't really like that. So that would make me, when I was younger, really play up Stanley and Murray, you know.
Yeah.
Stanley, Murray, because that kind of black, that's
excellent,
not, because you're
intellectual excellence.
Yeah, because you're always supposed to be going toward an academy whose theorems and postulations work against your best interests. You're supposed to always be submitting your work to them for their approval. And it's like a trick bag that's played on you. So I realized that when I was younger. My mama used to always say it, you know, I can give you a degree that says I am a fool, and you'll run around the whole world so proud of your degree and showing everybody that degree saying, I am a fool, I am a fool. So you have to wonder, what is the substance of your education? She used to always say that. So with Stanley and Murray, their objectives on those things, that was really what they knew about. Their objectives was so rooted in an Afro-American tradition that I understood and came from, that it was unbelievably, the education was, phew, man, go to Murray's house every Sunday, that's my man. I could just, at a certain point, I was going to his house 2-3 times a week, man, sit up with Moselle. And all of it wasn't even teaching, it just talking and hanging and reading. He'd tell me, and the stuff he's telling me to read would be like William Faulkner, William Butler Yeats. It wasn't all Afro-American material.
Of course not. Oh, man, he had you and me read Malraux.
Malraux, yeah.
Kenneth
Voices
Burke.
of Silence. You know what it was. Museum Without Walls.
Hey, baby.
The Human Condition.
All right, now, why?
On and on.
That's
you
right.
know, and meeting Romare and with Ellison was very different. You know, with Ellison, he was reading his stuff. His writing was so poetic, and he loved it. So when I see him, he would read, and he's also a trumpet player. So it's
right.
We talking about the trumpet and people, what you think about this and that, and also it's a generational thing. Like, you know, they were in school in the 1930s.
Yeah.
So they were the age.
Yeah,
they were the age of my grandfather, or older. You know, it's like of my grandfather. And you know, they used to always call me that. I'm your intellectual grandfather. You know, so we would be like joking about age and time. So many of the things that I thought, of course, they didn't agree with. We just had a generational thing, but the education that they gave and the depth of their knowledge and study, there's no way I understood that there were people on earth like them who knew that. You know, I wasn't aware of it, man. When I first met Murray and went to his house, it was like, damn, I didn't understand nothing him and Crouch was talking about, not a word of it. Hey, man, certainly you heard so-and-so, you read this, but I never read none of that, never heard of it. So I was just like a dude from New Orleans whose daddy was a great teacher of music and who had intellectual interest in an environment that was not an intellectual environment. And yeah, man, the education and the feeling and just the depth. Plus, now you got to also talk about just how soulful they were when you was hanging with them.
Oh, absolutely.
See, I can relate to them on that level.
Well, see, for me too. It was, except for Ellison, because I didn't know Ellison, but it wasn't just.
He was soulful.
Yeah, I hear you.
Franny, but you get in there with Franny, and she liked you to tease him too. The funny thing was, because you know how Murray didn't like you teasing him.
Right.
He was always very serious. So you know you did, but you could get with Moselle. She liked when you mess with him.
Right.
So if you mess with Murray, she would like that. So she would start saying, "Oh, what did you tell him? Oh, I'm so surprised to see the master being talked to that way." So you know, I love this, and you know, we were more like family, man. So of course I'd be messing with him.
Yeah.
And I mean, teasing was just kind of naturally my way, man. I tease my daddy all the time. I tease him. Crouch, I was nothing but ribbing all the time with me and him.
Right.
So, but because he was so threatening to the kind of liberal establishment,
Yeah.
because he and eventually, me and Crouch started arguing about all that anti-black shit he would be writing.
Yeah.
And I'd be like, man, you got to, but he was a guy who you couldn't put him on that plantation. Now
no, you couldn't pigeonhole him in any.
You couldn't get him, right? Because at any moment,
that's right,
he could not behave.
Right, that's right.
He could, I remember he wrote an article for Jazz Times, I think.
I think it was Jazz Times. He was a columnist there for a minute.
Called "Putting a White Man in Charge," and we had a bet on that article.
And that was the one that they said, "You're out of here."
I said, but before the article came out, we were laughing about it. I said, Jazz, you better go back to that other material where you constantly assaulting black people, because when you write that, when you put this article out, you're gonna lose your job over that. Because my liberalism is gonna take me so far. You can come into my house, I'm gonna show you off. It's like what Ellison wrote in Invisible Man. But don't think that means you're gonna come in here and start sleeping with my daughter. This ain't a part of that equation. Like you overstepped now.
That movie that just came out with Muhammad Ali
and Sam Cooke. Terrence wrote the music for that.
Yeah, man, that reminds me of this scene in One Night in Miami, directed by Regina King, my favorite actress, where it's the scene where you first see Jim Brown, the Jim Brown character played by this excellent brother, Aldous Hodge, driving his Cadillac. Joe goes up to an estate, probably a plantation. You see the cypress on the trees and everything. He got his Cadillac. He gets out, knocks on the porch door. A young lady comes out, a young white girl. May I help you? He says, could you tell Mr. Carlton that Jim Brown is here? And she said, Jim Brown. She gets all excited, invites him in, calls her daddy. Daddy comes out. He's like, oh, James, greets him, with that Southern hospitality. In St. Simons, Georgia, where Jim Brown grew up. And they sit down. He says, would you like some lemonade? No, thank you. He has the young lady, the daughter, get some lemonade anyway. Again, Southern hospitality. So they talk, and he basically says, I'm so proud of you. 860 yards. You know what I mean? That's a record that'll always hold them. Jim Brown's like, well, I like the record and the championship. Don't worry about that. That record will stand the test of time. He said, actually, it's 1,863 yards. He said, that's more like it. So they talk more, and he had come because his aunt, Jim Brown's aunt, had said that Mr. Carlton wanted to see him. So Mr. Carlton's like, yeah, our families go back a long way. I'm so proud of you. The daughter comes back out and says, with the lemonade, hands it down, and says, Daddy, don't forget, we got to move that bureau. So he says, oh, okay. He gets up. Now this is Jim Brown. Okay. So Jim Brown, says, oh, you're moving some furniture? He says, let me give you a hand with that. And Mr. Carlton, played by Bo Bridges, comes and says, now, James, that sure is considerate of you, but we don't let niggas in the house. Now, you just go, you know what I mean? Proud of you, keep up the good work, and then turns around. So that kind of liberal, they will be polite to you as long as you stay in your lane, bottom line. And the characters of One Night in Miami, which was so powerful. You had not only Jim Brown, but you had Cassius Clay, then later Muhammad Ali, or soon thereafter, Sam Cooke, and Malcolm X. That was a powerful movie, man.
Yeah, man. Well, if you're from the South,
Yeah, my people are from.
But the North is
Georgia and Florida.
I'm gonna say one thing about the Southern. The Southern racism is actually more digestible for me than the Northern. But I'm from the South.
I agree. I'm from the North, but my people are from Georgia and Florida.
Yeah. So, the North are more intellectuals engaged in it, and the tactics are much more subtle and real for those who are like that. But these problems are they're nuanced, and they're tied into the whole kind of sectarianism and tribalism in the world. And just the way that people, you know, my little brother always says that most things out here are random. You can't make sense of it. But the one thing that's not random is the acquisition and the acquisition of power. And the acquisition of power and agency, and it comes in many forms. We talk about race, it comes in that form. We talk about gender, it comes in that form. We talk about pecking order in a family, it comes in that form. You know, these are timeless kind of issues and problems of humanity. Yeah. And we there's a continuous struggle against it. It doesn't matter who you look at, what century you're in. Depending on your level of education or just natural insight, you'll find people who were trying to create a desire in human beings for equality and to share agency and power and resources with others since the beginning of time. And it's an uphill struggle. And maybe that's just part of what the human journey is, that there is that struggle and that strife. And if you take that strife away, what are we down here doing? We're back in the proverbial Garden of Eden, or back in the where very little was happening. So for something to go on, you got to have some type of friction and some type of struggle.
Oh, there's no doubt about that, you know, and that gets back to democracy, you know, democracy, sweet. Well, I mean, democracy, in a pluralistic democracy, you have various groups vying for influence based on their interests, based on resources that they're struggling over. That's just kind of the way it is, as Albert Murray said, in an open society, you know.
Right. And the question for each of us is, what do we actually do to participate in the society? Like, what do I do? I vote, I'll complain to a congressperson. But in terms of the community I live in and the democracy that's in that, in terms of making more education available, some things I participate in, but I could always do more and better as a citizen. And I don't know how many of us think they could do better, but I think for us to evolve our way of life, there has to be a greater investment by citizens. It has to be more than voting.
That's right.
Voting is not enough. Right. And it's true of any education. What do you want for everybody else's kids? You know, you're not, you could go back to the days when somebody was a carpenter, they could show you how to do carpentry work. People in the neighborhood would set up workshops for people. You know, we used to have a music school, Burton's Music School. It's just community music school, man. We would go, and Burton and them would teach us fundamentals of music. And that wasn't a thing that was the school board sanctioned. It was just a guy in the community that, yesterday, I don't know if we were talking about when we played ball when I was growing up. It's because the guy who was the janitor, we called him Mr. Buddy. He said these kids should be able to play some ball. Everything was segregated. But he went and he petitioned that he got us some old uniforms, man, from the 1950s. We running out there. Talked to a chemical company. They let us use their lot, filled out whatever paperwork he had to do, went around from person to person, raised money to get this from that one and this from that one, like a lot of church organizations do. And then they put us on the schedule. So the schedule was the 7 or 8 white teams, and then it was 3 black teams because of him. And he's just a citizen. He wasn't getting paid to do it. Right. He was giving up time. And now the gym is named after him. And I didn't know it. And Jonathan Baptiste and I were talking because he's from Kenner. And I was telling him how we used to be in the gym, and Mr. Buddy, he was the time when he come into the gym. It wasn't the gym was not named for him. It was a new gym. And we said we would be in the gym, and Mr. Buddy would come in the gym. All the kind of older cats would say, man, we got to stop all this cursing because Buddy is up in here. Like the respect that we had for him. We call him Mr. Buddy. He said, Mr. Buddy. I said, yeah. He said, the gym is named after him. I said, what you talking about? He said, the gym is called Buddy Lawson. I said, it wasn't called Buddy Lawson when I was growing up. It was called Doohey, something Doohey Gym. And he said, he sent me a picture of Buddy Lawson of the gym now with Buddy's name on it. And I was thinking just across time, how to us, Buddy was a person that we knew.
Yeah.
To Jay Batten, them, there was the guy whose name was on the gym.
Mm.
And sometimes, you know, these things go on for generations, and it's these age-old human battles, man, millennia.
Yeah.
And we're a part of that struggle. We want to see change in our lifetime, but many times we're just a small part of the change. And we spend our whole lives toiling, our lives, our parents' lives, and their parents. We could spend whole, you know, it's worth the struggle. But when you start to think it shouldn't be a struggle because you're a certain age, that's when you become old.
Yeah, dig that.
I think
Right.
you keep your youthfulness as long as you know that the struggles that you had and that you saw and the changes you want to see in the community, in the education system, in my case, in the arts, that it's, you don't determine the outcome of it. Many people do. And all you can do is your part, but you got to keep that struggle and that hunger. Because for Black people, when you lose that struggle, you become like an uncle.
Mm.
You know, and then you get always good reviews, everybody loves you.
Yeah.
And you used to be something, because now your virility is gone, and your ability to fight against the injustices. And the injustices not just by white people.
Right.
You know, I say my daddy would always say they couldn't play jazz in the building at Dillard. And
Right.
you know, it's an uphill struggle.
So let me ask you this, man. For Tuning to Leadership, when I first did a piece on you about, you know, you as a leader in the music, I also, you know, mentioned towards the end about you as a civic and cultural leader. So when you hear cultural leadership, I mean, I frankly think that you've been doing that since you came on the scene. You know, some of the battles you were, you know, waging, and this leadership you took on certain issues based on integrity. What to you is the meaning and importance of cultural leadership?
I think cultural, in the sense that we mean it related to the arts, is concerned with your way of life and your mythology, how you interpret the meaning of your symbols and your traditions as expressed in the art. And it means that you're willing to embrace changes to that tradition that bring you closer to meaning and function of it. And in the times that is needed for you to maintain the line on some things, though it may be unpopular, you're willing to do that. And to be any type of leader, I feel that you have to have imagination to imagine the world a different way. But in relation to first knowing the world that you're imagining. And then you have to have the courage to stand by some type of vision. And with that courage is also the courage to be flexible enough to change. And then you have to have the discipline to continue to study and question and to be rigorous. So I think that ultimate cultural leadership in relation to the arts is about your ability to interpret symbols in the symbolic language of the arts and what they mean to the experience of being who you are and where you are.
Okay, now you mentioned about your mythology, you know, and that's something you've been riffing on for decades. And, you know, I've heard you say that, you know, our cultural mythology is something that we need to, one, understand and get back to. And of course, jazz is a part of that. So can you just go into a little more detail about the mythological piece and why they're so crucial to your conception?
Well, like in America, let's take all the deepest myths, which is the rags to riches story is one myth. Now, of course, Louis Armstrong, whoever Horatio Alger story, Louis Armstrong coming from the very bottom, going to the very top in terms of influence and a depth of understanding, he has to be off the chain of American heroes. In our mythology, he cannot be presented heroically. So he ends up being like a jester in our mythology, is what we know.
You're talking about in the United States of America,
yeah, now
writ large.
Writ large, and what do we remember him as now? Is he a part of curriculum? His greatest achievements known? Is he studied? You know, that's just one example. So the question of your mythology is, what is heroic behavior? What is virtuous? And when you look at movies and other things that interpret that mythology, and you look at where Black folks are consistently put in those movies, and the image is always like a fool or the second guy watching the action or a victim of something. So that's kind of, you start to look at the symbolism of who you are. And you look at, in our lifetime, when you saw Black people in movies, up to the mid-1960s, they were always like afraid of ghosts and always being victimized by somebody and always still in the kind of minstrel tradition. Always
shucking and jiving.
Shucking and jiving. Never any romantic, forget about that. I mean, it's never any kind of, it was always something. If it was a woman, it was always loud, coming out the kitchen, Aunt Jemima, telling everybody, was she smarter than we thought she was? You know, it's always like a kind of patronizing. Then 15 years later, from 1965, in 15 years that we lived through, we went from that to being criminals, predators, pimps, hustlers, drug addicts. We became all of that in 15 years. Then we weren't afraid of ghosts. That was the transition, and that was the transition that took place to justify the crimes of the civil rights movement. So whenever something happens that makes you question a lying narrative, you have to figure out, how am I going to disavow this fact and get back to the lying narrative? So, okay, these people, obviously, we can't keep saying they're afraid of ghosts because of the civil rights movement. What can we say about them so that we can keep the same narrative that they're subhuman and have deserved the treatment that they receive? Make them criminals, celebrate pimps. I'll never forget how much my mama was really against all those pimp movies that we loved and went to see. And we loved them, you know, so, and it actually helps me today when there are things that I don't like that everybody loves, like, you know, the use of the N-word and stuff I've talked about for years. I just think about myself at 15 and 14 and 16 and the type of arguments and fights I would have with my mama, and how I was ready to dismiss her as old-fashioned because she didn't think it's suitable that our mythology be changed to being pimps. She hated that. So, you know, that's when you control the symbology. Once I can control that symbolism, I put you where I want to put you. And then you will then act in the fashion that your mythic symbolism tells you to act in. So if I tell you to be a victim, then every story is a victim.
Right.
And it's not just applied to Black folks, it could be anybody.
That's right. I mean, a lot of the folks, for example, a lot of the folks who mention this again, you know, as we did in the other interview, a lot of folks in the Capitol insurrection, you know, they actually perceive themselves as victims. It's like, you know,
well, a lot of them are victims.
There you go. That's right. So there's a truth to it. That's right.
Like, you know, we're always willing to sacrifice facts to make something feel a certain way. Right. That's why Shakespearean villains are always so good.
Yeah.
Because they're not one thing.
That they're round
things.
That's right.
Right. And it's much easier to say these people are all day sitting up somewhere, Duck Dynasty or whatever the cliche is of the moment. Man, I don't even know. I mean, I'm not looking at stuff.
Right. So, but we did have Sidney Poitier, for example, in that in-between period where he represented, you know, dignity, you know, honor.
It was a big deal. Like, you know, you looked at every movie he was in. But even then, the plot lines was, guess who's coming to dinner? The woman had to be blind. Or Lilies of the Field, he was desexualized. Now, the movies they made with him and Bill Cosby, you know, when those movies came in, Buck and the Preacher, Harry Belafonte, you start to have movies that put people in heroic roles. They could have a love interest, Sounder. You know what I'm saying? You remember every movie because that was when they still had all the Black ball players in ebony. So every event that happened, everybody knew anything that was positive.
That's right.
You know, I remember when Shirley Chisholm,
that's why Ebony in itself was very positive, because it was like, you know, Black achievement, excellence, you know. But what you saying about?
But it was smaller, right? You know. I remember when Shirley Chisholm was on TV. My mama made us look at it. And when you're young, you're not looking at political announcements and all of that. You know, you're Barbara Jordan, man. When Barbara Jordan, they did a 60 Minutes on Barbara Jordan. That was later, but you knew whenever You knew Kareem and, his struggle to get people to call him Kareem, and they kept wanting to call him Lou Alcindor. You knew about Muhammad, and the music had, you knew about what Marvin Gaye, his struggle, and, you knew Jet had stuff in it, but everything was, you were trying to work with your symbology. And when Harry Belafonte would speak his consciousness, you kind of, man, this dude is conscious. The Last Poets, it wasn't known by everybody, but there was a consciousness movement. And then as that began to erode, how do you control? Then the symbolism, it changed totally. It became a celebration of gangsters and thugs who was preying on the community. I always have to tell people, when we were coming up, we were segregated. So you wasn't like, who you are, you was who you were. But it wasn't a thing where you were going to celebrate dudes who were robbing and killing people, drug dealers. I mean, they wasn't celebrated. Now they had power. You didn't mess with them.
Right.
But it wasn't. Now there's the thought that every person who grows up in the hood is a criminal. And that's all cultural mythology.
Right. Right. I mean,
and they really, most of the people are victims of the criminals who live there.
No doubt, no doubt. Which is
why,
and
the criminals are not. There's not a large number of them. It's not how it's portrayed. It's all
that's
criminals
right.
here.
Exactly.
And it's just it just will take time. It's a lot to work through slavery and the aftermath of it, and having to carry the guilt of the nation, and to not have real, actual, acute leadership, and it's always it's just going to be a struggle for a much longer time if it ever resolves, which we don't know. There's so much change always going on, right. And it's so difficult to ascertain what the change is or what the route is because there's a lot going on. Absolutely. And no matter how much you think you know,
there's always
you take all of what you know and all of what everybody knows, and y'all still all together don't know anything.
That's right, relative to the level of knowledge.
Relative to what there is, relative to what's actually happening in general, because things happen. That's right. I always ask my daddy, did he think segregation would end when Martin Luther King started his career in the mid-50s? He said, no, nowhere in the world. And he said that when he saw Lyndon Johnson become president, he said, well, that's it for that.
Because Lyndon Johnson was from the South.
It's from the South. Yes.
Yeah, but the irony was, and Murray talks about this in South to a Very Old Place, of course, the irony was that as Murray had a elder, Black Southern person speak in South to a Very Old Place, he said, we need a mean cracker to deal with those other mean crackers. You know what I mean? So the irony of that, but so Johnson ended up in terms of, civil rights, being more heroic. Now, Vietnam's another story, but.
Yeah, but this is an example of what I'm saying. Like you
How
can't,
complicated
whenever you dap him for what he did for this issue, he's got to also be right on Vietnam. It's like who of us, and I'm not trying to, but just a nuanced way of looking at the world, and more accurate is sometimes you get messianic Jesus type figures that are perfect, but
that's few and far between.
I mean, if I have to be perfect, let me stop talking.
Yeah, exactly.
I really, I don't have nothing to say because I've messed up a lot.
We all have, man.
Did a lot of dumb stuff that I knew better than.
Mm-hmm.
But does that make what we're talking about this invalid?
No.
If that's the case, let's just be quiet.
I hear you, man. So let me ask you this, because I think, one of the things that I have been really researching for some decades and have come to this particular phrase, I've been researching culture, over race for decades, because I saw how Stanley, how Murray, how Ellison, the trick bag of race is not something that they fell into. They knew that they knew that shit was some bullshit. So, but they focus on culture in its various forms of manifestation. So just like there's social intelligence, emotional intelligence, there's cultural intelligence, which is not something that's really focused on. So when you hear the term cultural intelligence, what does that mean to you?
It means that you're aware of how your story fits into the overall human story. And it's difficult because tribalism feels good. It doesn't matter what that tribe is. It could be my mom and all of her friends talking, ooh, girl, and then so and so, and girl, let me tell you, girl, they was doing this, a child, ooh, girl. Or it could be a bunch of dudes calling each other, yeah, my nigga, I was, just, or it could be I'm sure what white folks do when I'm sure they got they thing they do. I don't know what it is, but I mean, they have it.
Well,
Any group of people.
Well, any
group of people.
Yeah, I mean that BS of race. I mean, let's look at ethnicity. Italians, Irish, Polish.
Any group of people. But let's look at not even that. Other subgroups we don't even know. Taylor Street. Like when I was growing up, it was in Kenner, it was Webster Street.
Mm.
I had got in a scrape with some dudes on Taylor Street. Everybody on Webster Street was saying, man, we got to go over and kick the people in Taylor Street ass. When I was in New Orleans, I lived in Pigeon Town, and then it was Pigeon Town versus Holly Grove. Man, we better not see nobody from Pigeon Town in Holly Grove.
Yeah, so, it was a similar thing. I mean, growing up, moved from Brooklyn to Staten Island, we were in a section called Clifton, and Clifton had Park Hill apartments, 6-story. I happened to live in a 6-story project, man. And the neighborhood next door was Stapleton, the Stapleton projects. Now, it so happened that the Washington family were in Stapleton. And I ended up meeting Reggie Washington, Kenny Washington, Yvette Washington, and they ended up influencing my whole conception of music and jazz and everything. But in terms of just the neighborhoods, it was like, you looked at Stapleton, like, matter of fact, first time I met Reggie Washington, we had come over, play some ball in Stapleton, and Reggie could play. Reggie could play. He had that vertical leap and everything. And we were going at it. Yeah. Found out that he was a musician, a bassist, perfect pitch. You know what I mean? And we became friends, man. But yeah, so the tribal thing is real. But this is where I get to this idea, man. It's a philosophical concept from Anthony Appiah that political philosopher Danielle Allison has extended, elaborated, and refined in some of her work. Rooted cosmopolitanism. You can be rooted in traditions, right? You can be rooted in identity, various forms of identity, but you could be cosmopolitan, a citizen of the world at the same time.
Yeah, but that's like you being yourself and also being a part of your family. You're not your brothers and sisters, but you're them too.
Right.
And that's the broader thought, and that is the thought in a mythology. And that's why cultural symbolism is so important. And cultural intellect is the ability to accurately interpret these symbols. And they're not necessarily easy to interpret because the truth is always a good lie is always real close to the truth. And sometimes a good lie feels much better than what's real. Sometimes somebody be telling you a story, say, no, man, make up something better than that. Don't
right.
Don't tell us what happened.
I know, right?
And it's possible for you to lie to yourself so much that you start to believe it. So it's important to keep humor is important too. Like
absolutely, man. You can't
take stuff too seriously, even though it's serious.
Right.
You got to still have fun with it.
That's one of the reasons.
At the end of the day, it might not work out the way.
That's right.
At the end of the day,
yeah,
you don't determine what it is. You're another person interpreting it.
That's the truth, and that's one of the reasons. I was just gonna say that's one of the reasons why like political ideologies. When I see activists, you know what I mean, and we need that. There's no doubt we need that. But it's like when I see these movements and I see how serious they are, and I'm like, what's the music of your movement? Can you laugh? Can you take a step back and express some humor? Can you, I mean, this is talking about basic humanity, man. That's why, to me, political ideologies are going to be limits, man. When we talk about culture, we're talking about people who derive, this is my perspective, values and meaning from certain actual practices of engagement, with other people, and also how you perceive yourself. And I'm gonna riff on what you said. Like, I love the scaling of what you did. I said rooted cosmopolitanism, and I took it from the rooted identity to citizen of the world or cosmos. And you said, but that's like the individual in relation to the family. So we're talking about like a fractal kind of relationality. I love that, man. And so it's very similar in that way. And if we can get a perception of like how we as individuals are going to be agents. We were talking about that in relation to like, if you're a citizen, take action, try to make things better, do what you can where you are as an individual. At the same time, you got to do stuff in collaboration with other people. It's so fundamental, but we get caught up, you know what I mean?
But I'm saying that to myself, you know, I'm not even saying it to nobody else.
All right now.
Like, that's what I need to do. I don't know. I can't speak for what somebody else, but I need to do it.
I agree with you, man. I appreciate that. And as always, man, I appreciate your time. I appreciate your insights. I appreciate your integrity. And I appreciate your soulfulness, man.
Hey, man, always. It's always good to see you and talk to you.
All right, bro.
All right, Greg.
So that was my conversation with Wynton Marsalis from a few years ago. And you could hear his musical depth, intelligence, and even genius. And you also heard him talk about, you know, the fact that his relationships with Stanley Crouch, Ellison, Albert Murray, Ralph Ellison, and Albert Murray were like family, and the significance of that. So what I'd like to do is end by talking about your part two, Arye. You mentioned that there's a part one of your initiation, your jazz initiation story, and there's a part two. Tell us about part two.
Yeah, well, part two is connected to that down-to-earth, soulful wisdom and intelligence that came out that you brought out of Wynton, that came out in the interview. And I think down-to-earth, it's helpful to start with down-to-earth as a term. We can look at it from two directions. One is the classic Hebrew Jacob's ladder, which is Sulam Mutzav Alza V'Roshom Magia Shamayma, a ladder that's rooted in the earth, whose head reaches the heavens. This is a model of completion. This is a model of human growth, that it's not, high culture is not disconnected from the earth. It's rooted in the earth. From the Omni-American perspective and the language of Albert Murray, it encompasses within itself the folk elements of the popular, but it's fine art. But that elevation that's reached confers upon it a different perspective, which in the American context is unique. Within the American context, it confers a way of looking at things from above, but in a very humane way. It's a perspective that enables you to recognize that there are higher things, there is nobility, because that's the kind of person you are, to look humanely upon the whole. In 1989, I was a student in college, and I was at my second university. I would attend three. One thing they don't teach at universities is anything connected to the soul, really, in any profound sense. And that's what I most needed. And I found that, and I listened to the album repeatedly, and Wynton's Majesty of the Blues, it accompanied me like a friend. It inspired me and pointed me in the direction and reflected to me in art. Remember, I'd had that original experience in '86. I was open and receptive. And the music itself, together with Stanley Crouch's liner notes, which I, in time would understand how he was informed and inspired by Ralph Ellison and Albert Murray, et cetera, and had his own voice. But those liner notes together, especially with the sermon, Premature Autopsies, that for me was a way I sustained my soul, because that's a text and a piece of music that offers a vision of nobility explicitly, an explicit appeal to nobility, to nobility as a real thing. And I can really, when I was really in all other respects kind of surrounded by a spiritual desert, this was an oasis, and it sustained me. And I will be forever grateful to the music and to the wisdom for that.
Oh, that's beautiful. That is a beautiful story, man. So, and in the show notes, we'll definitely make sure that we link to, Wynton's Democracy Suite, Majesty of the Blues, particularly Premature Autopsies.
Yeah.
So folks can check it out for themselves. So we certainly thank you for joining us at Straight Ahead, the Omni-American podcast. We want you to stay with us and keep swinging. Thank you for watching us on Straight Ahead, the Omni-American podcast.
Subscribe today and fight for a future in which the many join as one against bigotry.